Hello, this is Martin Gore from Depeche Mode.
Hi, this is Dave Gahan from Depeche Mode, and you are listening to
Depeche Mode, the podcast. I'm your host, Jon Justice. Thank you so much for checking out another episode. If you want to email me, TalkShowNerd@gmail.com. And of course, if you're enjoying this on YouTube, you can go and leave a comment there. Relatively short episode this week. We have some listener feedback, emails that I want to answer, no new news to share, even though I have been privileged of some information that unfortunately I can't share with you on the show, and I'll explain here in just a moment. Also, we'll get into questions that I would ask the band if I were blessed enough to have that opportunity. A friend of the show, Chris Culpepper, had asked that last week, and I've jotted down some questions. That would be probably the top questions that I would ask Martin or Dave when and if given the opportunity. But let me start here first. So I wrestled with bringing this up at all because I can't share with you what I know on the show. I respect the source that shared with me some information, incredibly credible information. Nothing earth-shattering by any stretch. But I was really thrilled to be told these few things. And, they asked that I not share them on the podcast, so I'm not going to. And as I was getting ready to do the show this week and thinking about the show this week, I was wondering whether or not I would even go and bring it up. And I decided to put myself outside of the podcast as if I were a listener. Like, would I want to know that somebody else knew some information that I wasn't aware of? And there's a part of me that goes, yeah, I kind of would. I think we're all a family and friends in our love of Depeche Mode as being devotees. So again, I'm not going to violate the confidence of the individual that shared this with me. And again, I was really excited to hear these few things. So with that being said, I know nothing about when Dave or Martin might be getting back together again to record music, or if they're going to get back together and record music. I'll just say that as a fan, I'm excited for the future. I really am. Everything happens for a reason, and I've asked a lot of questions on this show regarding what may be coming up or not coming up in the future, and I'll just say that as a fan, I'm excited. I'm excited to be a Depeche Mode fan, and I felt really blessed to have been able to hear these few things that I heard, and I'm just going to leave it at that. I hope it doesn't annoy you, but again, I'm not going to violate the confidential information, the confidentiality, and the confidential information that was gone and shared with me. But again, as a fan, I know that I would want to hear that, and so if you're watching on the YouTube page, you can see the smile on my face, and hopefully that's enough to brighten your day a little tiny bit. So with that, let's get into some of your listener feedback this week. First off, this goes back to last week on the show, and Chris Culpepper had asked, have you ever compiled questions that you wanted to ask Dave, Martin, or Alan if by chance you had the opportunity to interview any of them? I'd like to hear a couple of them since you are a super fan like us. All the best, Chris Culpepper. So, first off, this wasn't necessarily an easy task. And I say that because I typically conduct my interviews very organically. I like the interviews to kind of unfold and to let the conversation go wherever it's going to go, and then ask the questions in the moment based off of instinctive reaction. That being said, what I did write down were a number of questions that I specifically know that I would like to go and ask the band. And I'd love to hear from you and what you would want to know from either Martin, Dave, or Alan. And a couple of these wouldn't obviously apply to Alan, but I think the other ones would. So here's a few of the questions that I would ask. Is there ever a time during the creative process when you stop and think, this doesn't sound like Depeche Mode? Is that even a consideration of the music sounding like what fans might expect? I will say that my guess is on that's probably not part of the calculation when it goes into the recording process. I think it's just through the creation of these individuals that the songs end up sounding the way that they sound, and that sound ends up being Depeche Mode. But I would be very interested to know if they've ever recorded a track and they kind of sat back and went, that doesn't really sound like us. I know, for example, during the Songs of Faith and Devotion recording session, when they were working on Judas, I believe that they had said that there was a version that they had done that sounded more reggae than it did anything else, and they had to kind of move away from that. So another question that I would ask, and this is probably the one that I don't want to say I would start off with it, but this is the first one that came to mind, and it's kind of an odd one. Do you think, and again, to Martin, Alan, or Dave, do you think you have a good understanding of how much the fans admire your work? You know, the fandom of Depeche Mode is truly unique and special, and I would really love to get the perception from all of them of whether or not they seem to understand or can relate to how a Depeche Mode fan like myself or you listening feels about them and how special the band is to us. Something specific to Martin and Dave, and I've been thinking about this question since Memento Mori came out, was when recording Memento Mori, was there a conscious effort to include nods from previous albums? The squeal in People Are Good that sounds like the one at the beginning of I Feel You. The fact that People Are Good in and of itself sounds like a throwback track to the Construction Time Again and Some Great Reward eras. The singing of Sometimes in Caroline's Monkey that sounds a lot like the Sometimes from Clean. I would also toss in there Ghosts Again, simply because of what I see as a similarity definitely in the lyrical structure of the song with Enjoy the Silence. Those seem like tracks that are oddly very similar to one another. And listen, Enjoy the Silence, one of my favorite tracks of all time, and I think that rings true for a lot of us. Ghosts Again is right up there with it. That's how much I love that song. If you had to perform a past tour today, you were going to go on the road and you were going to do another tour, stage design, set list, the whole 9 yards, which tour would you choose? And with that, what tours do the band members immediately think of looking back fondly? Like, which tour did they look back on with the most positive outlook, apart from the last tour? Because I think that typically is kind of a default, is that a lot of times, you know, you ask a question like that, and I think the answer would be, well, it's the last tour because it's the tour that's top of mind. I would like to take the Memento Mori tour out of the mix and find out which tour they look upon most fondly apart from that. Are there any B-sides you wish were on an album? And conversely, any tracks you look back on and think they should have been left off an album? You know, and that's a question, too, depending on the answer, where I'd love to get into the choosing of the set list and whether or not there was debate between Martin and Dave and even Alan about which tracks to include and which ones not to include. Now, granted, that's kind of album-specific, depending on how many B-sides there are. Another question, and again, how this happens organically that just came to mind, is are there tracks that were recorded that maybe exist but were never released as B-sides that are just sitting somewhere? What songs do Dave or Martin wish that they would have done the vocals for instead? So, like, which Martin tracks does Dave wish he had done the vocals on, and which tracks that Dave has sung on the album does Martin wish that he had done the vocals on? If you had to re-record any album, which album would you choose? I like that one a lot, because that's open for all kinds of different pathways of discussion. Like, if you had to re-record it, would you pick an album that you wish you could re-record? Or was it the recording of that album that was such a great experience that you would want to go and do it again? I think there's multiple answers that could be within that one question. Is there a song that you wanted to do on tour but never have done on tour? And this one I like a lot, and it's almost one that I'd have to give. Like, I have a hard time with a lot of these because it requires, you know, Martin or Dave or Alan to go back and really think about these things. And, you know, and sometimes I feel like you may not have an immediate answer because you had to think about it for a while. And this would be one of those. If you take the audience expectation out of the mix, like if the audience expectation and enjoyment of the concert was completely irrelevant, do you think the set list would be dramatically different? And then with that, again, if I were able to give them the questions ahead of time, I would ask the question of, you know, what set list would you create? Let's say you had 20-track set list, audience, you know, enjoyment of the concert, expectation is completely irrelevant. What does that set list look like? And then the last one I had, again, on just questions that I would want to ask for certain. What's the least enjoyable aspect of a recording session? And even as I'm asking these questions, I'm already thinking of sort of subsequent questions afterwards. Maybe one day, on my bucket list, I'll have the opportunity. I would just love 45 minutes. Listen, I'd take 20 minutes to a half hour, but I would just love a solid 45 minutes to an hour just to sit down and have a conversation. And I'd almost would want it separate. I'd almost would want to, listen, I would take any dynamic relating to interviewing Martin, Dave, or Alan. But there's also a part of me that, you know, when it comes to Martin and Dave specifically, I almost would rather do singular one-on-one conversations so that they didn't have to share the answering of the questions so that I can get full questions out of both of them. But as I mentioned before, any questions that you would like to ask, feel free. I'll continue to compile a list, and one day if my bucket list item comes to fruition, maybe I can use some of your questions as well. All right, let's get to your emails this week. TalkShowNerd@gmail.com or comments left on YouTube. Sherry Bell writes, Happy New Year, John. Welcome back. Hope your holidays were fantastic. Praying for all the good people in Southern California. Yeah, it seems like the wildfires have, the winds have calmed down and the fires have slowed as well. But just the tragic, utter devastation for a region that I grew up in. It just breaks my heart, especially in that Altadena area. Like I said, I went to high school up near there, and to see what's happened is just, it's truly unbelievable. So horrifying to watch it unfold. Really enjoyed the podcast today. Thank you. Going to patiently watch and listen for some news on any Depeche releases in 25. Loved the 5 things we didn't know about the Construction Time Again album. Also interesting. Thank you. Thank you so much, Sherry Bell. Yeah, and like I said, man, as a Depeche Mode fan, I'm excited for the future. That's all. You know, and praying that Martin and Dave decide sooner rather than later to get together and make more music. Lawrence Akers writes, do you think there would be a singles box set release for some of the greatest hits only tracks and remixed, reissue songs? The Shake the Disease, It's Called a Heart, Only When I Lose Myself, Martyr, Personal Jesus, 2011, etc. I'd like to see that to help round out those releases. I don't know, you know, something tells me probably not. Those single box set releases have been very specific in what songs that they are including. And I imagine that we will get one eventually for Memento Mori as well. But considering that a lot of those tracks are already available on other compilations, I know they're not on vinyl. I don't necessarily see that as a possibility, but, you know, never say never. This is, by the way, just as a side note, because you mentioned Shake the Disease here. I'm going to talk about this on an upcoming episode. I've been trying to figure out how I wanted to handle it because I really want to include the track in the podcast. So I might have to do a podcast where I don't put anything up on YouTube or I just don't monetize it because I don't want to get busted with the cease and desist. But greatest remix ever. I'm going to throw this out there. And if you want to answer, maybe we can kind of build up answers over the course of the next few weeks. But the greatest Depeche Mode remix ever. I have one in mind. I'll tell you what it is right now. It's the extended Shake the Disease remix. I think that one's called Edit the Shake. But it's the extended remix for Shake the Disease. I was listening to it the other day. As a matter of fact, hold on a second. Let me just, as I'm doing the podcast, let me pull it up on my phone to make sure that I'm getting the name correct in that, because I know that I've got it. I ended up uploading it into one of my more recent Depeche Mode playlists. So let me go in here, and that is... Oh, looked at the wrong playlist. I'm sorry. Isn't this fantastic podcast fodder? Like, if you're watching on YouTube, I'm sure it's thrilling to see me scrolling through my my phone. If you're listening on the podcast, I don't edit these, so my apologies for being a horrible host. Yeah, so... Oh, nope, don't want to play it. I'll get busted. Sorry, it immediately went and popped up, and I didn't mean it for it to do that. So let me look at the album here. Yeah, so this actually lists it on iTunes on the DMBX3. Yeah, remix extended. I really do think that's the first one that comes to mind. That is such an incredible remix. It maintains the core and the essence completely of the original version while expanding upon it in the best possible ways. There's only one moment in that remix where it kind of stops down and you get this and it kind of breaks up the melodic part of it. That's the only part that I don't particularly care for. Other than that, it is one of their greatest remixes, is that extended mix of Shake the Disease. Absolutely just love that track. So something that we can talk about in future episodes, and if you want to email me that as well, I can compile those and share it with the listeners on a subsequent podcast. So Lawrence Akers, thank you so much for your comment. I appreciate it. Glenn, 1965, writes this: Happy New Year, John. We can only hope DM release something for us this year. Regarding DM fans dismissing anything outside of the Allen era, I agree this is an utter nonsense. I might consider their Berlin phase as the golden age, but I could never dismiss all creations before or since. Like us all, DM aged 20 is not DM aged 60. The evolution of DM is in itself part of my utter admiration and enjoyment of them throughout my life. Enjoy every reincarnation on its own merits. But I can't lie, I'd love them to reunite with Alan before it all ends. When you're feeling lost and can't cope, who lifts you up and gives you hope? In moments dark, when you're feeling low, who helps you through? Depeche Mode. Thank you for that, Glenn. I definitely appreciate that. And then lastly, we hear from a friend of the show, Stephanie, from the Baltic Sea. And she writes this: Depeche Mode, once again, are my anchor and my comfort. I had to say goodbye to my mom forever at the end of December, and now I'm waiting for the funeral. I can't get through this time without Depeche Mode. Nevertheless, I wish us all a happy and healthy new year. All the best from the Baltic Sea, Stephanie. Stephanie, I'm so very sorry to hear about your loss. I know that it's something that I'm not looking forward to when it comes to my family. I feel so blessed that my mother and father are still here with me. I can only imagine the grief that you must be dealing with right now. Thank you for sharing that. Many prayers have been said your way since receiving your email, and hopefully since then things are looking a little bit brighter for you, and will into this new year. But again, my deepest condolences, and I know I speak for for the rest of the listeners on the show as well, and, offering their deepest condolences too for your loss, Stephanie. And again, thank you so much for sharing that. Listen, that wraps up the show for this week. Thank you to everybody who's written into the show, talkshownerd@gmail.com, and those special individuals as well. Can't tell you how much I really do appreciate that. So I love being a Depeche Mode fan and being able to express that on this show and to hear from everybody who corresponds with the show and all of you that don't. I just appreciate the fact that you listen. If you want to support Depeche Mode, the podcast, and my podcasting efforts, and you do enjoy reading science fiction, I hope you'll take a moment and check out my science fiction space opera series, EMBARK. It is inspired in part by Depeche Mode, the world that we live in, and the life in general, life in the so-called space age as well. Tells an exciting science fiction space opera adventure story based in the future, where the music of the 80s through the 2000s is nostalgic and popular among the characters in the story. It has references to Depeche Mode, both direct and indirect as well. I wrote it for adults, but it's great for ages 11 plus. The content-wise is perfectly appropriate for kids as young as 11 years old. As Earth faces its end, you can follow pilots Taft, Katha on a journey of survival across the galaxy as they fight for humanity's future. I've actually put up a new description for Book 1 I wanted to share on the show this week. With interstellar travel possible, pilots are the future, and humanity won't survive without them. Taft Guardia reluctantly agrees to join his small band of fellow pilots and sneak off-world to a deserted moon outpost. But when a catastrophic industrial accident back home sets off an apocalyptic chain of events, there may be nothing left to return to. Upon arrival, Taft discovers the advanced freighter the Anniversary left abandoned. Excitement turns to fear when they come under attack, with the infamous vessel becoming a lifeboat in their fight for survival. When a ruthless corporate madman with an armada at his disposal attempts to gain control during the global evacuation, it's up to Taft and his ragtag crew to save Earth's evacuees before it's too late. You can pick up the EMBARK series, 7 books in all, in ebook, Kindle Unlimited, hardcover, paperback, and audiobook on Amazon.com. Just search for Jon, Jon Justice, and EMBARK on Amazon. Thank you so much for checking out this episode, and I'll talk to you again next week. I hope wherever you are happy, you are healthy, and you're safe. I'll talk to you then. Bye.
Hello, this is Martin Gore from Depeche Mode.
Hi, this is Dave Gahan from Depeche Mode, and you are listening to
Depeche Mode, the podcast.